Canada was once a symbol of stability, strong banks, steady jobs, and a reputation for safety while other nations stumbled. But behind that image, something has gone terribly wrong. Debt is exploding, families are stretched to the limit, and faith in the system is breaking down. The numbers look bad, but the story beneath them is even worse. This isn't just an economic slowdown, it's a national reckoning. How did one of the richest countries on earth end up on the edge of financial collapse? Today, we're talking about why Canada is going broke. According to Export Development Canada, the country's economic growth in 2025 is projected at just 0.9%. For most people, that number might not mean much. But here's the problem. When you factor in population growth, it effectively means the economy is standing still. And when growth stalls, every percentage point matters. But what's behind this slowdown? A big part of it comes from trade, and more precisely, trade tension. US President Donald Trump's administration has reintroduced tariffs on some of Canada's key exports: steel, aluminium, copper products, autos, and lumber. These industries are the backbone of Canadian manufacturing and exports. When they get hit, the shock spreads through the entire economy. At the same time, China has imposed its own counter-tariffs on Canadian goods, everything from canola to pork and seafood. So on one side, the US market is more expensive to access. On the other, the Chinese market is shrinking. For a country where roughly 1/3 of GDP comes from exports, this is a serious problem. If global trade slows down, a country like Canada feels it more than most. Now, it's not as if other major economies are booming. Germany is growing at just 0.3%, France at 0.6%, and the United States at 1.7%. But Canada's position near the bottom of that list is worrying because it suggests that even among struggling G7 nations, it's losing relative strength. Meanwhile, oil prices have dropped around 15% over the past year, reducing export revenue and government income, particularly in Alberta and Newfoundland. Companies are holding back on investments, factories are cutting shifts instead of hiring. Business owners talk about uncertainty, not collapse, but hesitation. And in economics, hesitation spreads like a virus. Canada's economy isn't falling apart in a dramatic crash. It's wearing down slowly, layer by layer, through tariffs, weak trade, and lost confidence. The real danger is quiet erosion, the kind that doesn't make headlines until the damage is already done. But all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. While the economy slows on paper, the real collapse is happening inside people's wallets. According to MNP's Consumer Debt Index, half of Canadians are only $200 or less away from insolvency, meaning that one small bill, one medical expense, or one missed paycheck could push them over the edge. Even more alarming, 1 in 3 Canadians is already technically insolvent and unable to meet their monthly obligations. After paying rent, groceries and utilities, the average disposable income has fallen to just $790 per month. That's all the money left for savings, emergencies, or any kind of cushion. So how do we get here? It's not one single cause, it's 3 long-term forces working together. First, wage stagnation. Incomes haven't kept up with living costs for over a decade. Many Canadians are working full-time, even overtime, but earning the same as they did years ago. Second, inflation. Even though official rates have cooled from their 2022 peak, prices haven't gone down. They've simply stopped climbing as fast. The average family now pays 25 to 30% more for groceries and housing than before the pandemic. And third, over-reliance on credit. Credit cards, lines of credit, and home equity loans have become safety nets for everyday living, not just emergencies. The average Canadian household now carries over $21,000 in non-mortgage debt. It's easy to look at these numbers and think it's just a few percentages in a math equation. But for ordinary people, it feels completely different. It's like running a marathon on a treadmill. You're sweating, working hard, but you're not moving forward. The finish line never gets any closer. And that brings us to the real paradox of Canada's economy. Debt has become the fuel that keeps consumption alive, but at the same time, it's eating away at financial stability. Canadians keep spending to maintain their standard of living, but they're doing it on borrowed time and borrowed money. Debt isn't just a financial tool anymore, it's become a national addiction, one that props up the illusion of prosperity even as it quietly erodes the country's resilience. For years, Canadians believed real estate was their safety net, the one investment that could never fail. However, that belief is now being put to the test. In September 2025, the housing market hit an all-time record. Over 91,000 new listings nationwide. That's a 20% surge above the 10-year average, which is the largest supply increase since the mid-90s. Yet sales barely moved. The sales to listing ratio fell to 43%, the lowest since 1995's. In simple terms, for every 100 homes listed, fewer than half actually sold. What this shows isn't just a cooling market, it's a change in psychology. Sellers are rushing to list before prices drop further, while buyers are stepping back, waiting for the next correction. The old idea of housing always goes up is being replaced by caution, even fear. For decades, home equity is seen as the golden goose. If you ever got to trouble, you could refinance, pull equity out, and start over. But that's no longer true. Rising interest rates have turned that same golden goose into a financial time bomb. When rates were at 1.5%, a family with a $500,000 mortgage might have paid $2,000 a month. Now at renewal, they're paying $3,500 and sometimes even more. That's not just a statistic. That's the grocery budget, the child's daycare, or the savings account gone. And here's the problem. Homeowners are doing everything they can to protect that one asset. They're cutting back on everything else. Car payments, credit cards, even food budgets, just to keep the roof over their heads. Debt counsellors across the country are hearing the same story. People will stop paying almost anything before they miss the mortgage. In a recent discussion, financial experts Doug Hoyes and Ted Mikolos summed it up perfectly. It's gone from being a source of security to a source of stress. And that's the heart of the problem. Canada's wealth engine, the housing market, is starting to work in reverse. What once lifted the middle class is now pulling it down. When an entire nation builds its prosperity on rising home values, any slowdown doesn't just affect property owners, it ripples through the entire economy. Construction, banking, consumption, everything. The housing market was supposed to be the foundation of stability. Now it's the very thing amplifying instability. We already mentioned that Canada's unemployment rate sits around 7%, which doesn't sound disastrous on paper, but that number hides a much deeper issue: underemployment. Across the country, millions of people technically have jobs, but they're working fewer hours than before. Overtime has disappeared, contract positions replaced full-time ones, and part-time work, once a stepping stone, has quietly become a long-term reality for many families. When you look closer, the problem isn't that people stop working hard, it's just the economy stopped rewarding work. For 4 consecutive years, real income, wages adjusted for inflation, has been shrinking. Let's put that into perspective. If you earn $60,000 in 2020, that same paycheck today has the buying power of roughly $53,000. You're earning the same number on paper, but you can afford less groceries, housing, everything. That's why the economic anxiety feels so widespread. It's not just job losses, it's the quiet erosion of value in every paycheck. People feel like they're running faster just to stay in place. And behind these struggles lies something structural, a productivity gap that's been growing for years. Canada's businesses are investing less in new machinery, research and technology than other developed countries. According to the data, business investment per worker is nearly 25% lower than in the United States. Add to that an ageing population, more retirements, fewer younger workers entering the labour force, and the result is an economy that's simply producing less per person. Productivity is the engine of wage growth, and Canada's engine is stalling. And this slowdown has consequences. When productivity falls, wages stagnate. When wages stagnate, people rely on credit. And when credit runs out, even a stable job can't protect you from financial trouble. So today, a full-time paycheck, something that once symbolised safety, no longer guarantees stability. In fact, for many middle-class Canadians, it's barely enough to keep the bills paid. When paychecks can't keep up with the cost of living, even good jobs lose their power to protect. That's when financial cracks start turning into crises, and that's where Canada finds itself now. You're probably wondering, what about young Canadians? What does this all look like for them? According to a recent Ipsos poll, 70% of Canadians now believe that Canada is broken. That's not just a fringe opinion, that's 7 out of 10 people across the country. And what's more revealing is who feels that way. The survey showed the highest frustration among Canadians aged 18 to 34. Nearly 8 in 10 young adults think the country isn't working anymore. They see high tuition, unaffordable housing, and jobs that don't lead anywhere. For them, the promise of progress has been replaced by a struggle for survival. Older Canadians, on the other hand, still remember a different era, one where owning a home was achievable, pensions were secure, and hard work usually paid off. They're nostalgic for that stability, but even they admit it's slipping away. The generational divide is more than just emotional. It's reshaping Canada's political map. The feeling that the system is broken has become the fuel of populism. Public anger is moving away from traditional parties towards voices promising to fix what others could not. It's why slogans like "take back control" or "make it fair again" are finding traction even in historically moderate parts of the country. But beneath the politics, there's an economic truth. When people stop believing the system is fair, they stop participating in it. Consumer confidence drops, spending slows, investment dries up. Think of it this way. A middle-class family that once spent freely now saves out of fear. A young professional delays buying a home because they no longer believe in upward mobility. And small business owners hesitate to hire because they don't trust tomorrow's demand. That's how emotion drives economics. So the real crisis isn't just in the numbers, it's in confidence. When a nation's middle class starts losing faith in its own future, everything else begins to unravel. And right now, that's exactly what's happening in Canada. A quiet loss of belief that tomorrow will be better than today. Have you ever heard the term psychological depression? Not the medical kind, the economic one. It's when financial pressure becomes so constant, so exhausting that it seeps into every part of daily life. In Canada today, that's exactly what's happening. It's not just about being broke, it's about being tired of trying not to be. People are working full-time jobs, budgeting carefully, cutting expenses, yet somehow they're still falling behind. The paycheck hits the account, bills are paid, and within days, it's gone. No matter how much effort they put in, the finish line keeps moving further away. There is a staggering emotional toll to doing everything right and still drowning. Debt has become more than a financial burden. It's become a source of shame. People hide it like an illness. They don't talk about it at work. They avoid family gatherings. They smile in public and panic in private. According to credit counsellors, many Canadians wait until they're 3 months behind before even asking for help, because admitting financial struggle still feels like personal failure. But the truth is, this isn't a failure of character. As one financial advisor put it, when you're doing everything right and still falling behind, the problem isn't you, it's the environment. And that's what makes this downturn so different. It's no longer just an economic recession, it's a psychological one. The stress, the uncertainty, the constant pressure to keep up, it's creating a silent epidemic of burnout. When people start feeling like effort no longer equals progress, something breaks, not just in their wallets but in their spirit. That's when economies lose more than productivity, they lose belief. And that's where Canada stands now, not just facing a financial crisis, but living through a crisis of morale. Listening to government press conferences, you'd think everything is under control. Growth may be slow, they say, but it's stable. Inflation is easing. Job numbers are encouraging. On paper, it all sounds fine. But beneath that calm tone lies a system that's quietly breaking apart. The truth is, Canada's economy has structural flaws that no one in power seems willing to confront. Productivity, the amount we produce per hour worked, has barely grown in years. In fact, Canada's productivity is now lower than it was before the pandemic. Instead of asking why, politicians keep focusing on short-term optics. They celebrate minor quarterly rebounds, release new slogans about innovation and green growth, and announce programs that sound transformative but rarely change anything on the ground. Year after year, the same issues persist: slow output, weak competitiveness, and declining investor confidence. Part of the problem is that policy has become reactive, not strategic. Instead of leading, governments manage. They wait for problems to become crises, then respond just enough to calm the headlines. It's not governance anymore, it's damage control. This avoidance has a cost. It creates what economists call policy paralysis, the inability to act decisively even when the facts are clear. Every reform becomes too politically risky, every solution delayed by further study. The result? A government that looks busy but accomplishes little. And here's the danger. Over time, people get used to decline. When growth under 1% becomes normal, when underperformance becomes routine, expectations shrink. That's the normalization of stagnation, the slow acceptance that the best days are behind us. If nothing changes, economists warn Canada could face its own lost decade, a long stretch of weak productivity, low growth, and eroding confidence. The irony is that everyone sees the cracks. Economists, businesses, ordinary citizens, everyone except the people paid to fix them. And until the government stops managing appearances and starts addressing the foundation, those cracks will only get wider. So what happens if nothing changes? What if the cracks we've talked about are simply left to spread? The worst case scenario isn't a dramatic collapse overnight, it's something slower, quieter and far more dangerous. A decade of drift, a period where Canada doesn't crash, but fades, year after year, facing weak growth, falling productivity and rising frustration. For ordinary people, life gets harder and progress stops feeling possible. In that future, prices don't necessarily skyrocket, they just never come down. Wages inch upward but never catch up. The middle class keeps shrinking, and young Canadians start looking abroad for opportunity. Meanwhile, public services slowly deteriorate. Healthcare wait time gets longer, infrastructure repairs are delayed, and trust in leadership keeps fading. And that's the real danger. Not a single financial collapse, but the slow erosion of confidence, where people stop believing things can improve. They stop investing, stop taking risks, stop hoping. Economies don't die from lack of money, they die from lack of belief. But it doesn't have to end that way. There is a way back. Canada still has immense potential, world-class resources, educated talent, and a strong democratic system. The challenge isn't a lack of capacity, it's a lack of direction. The first step is to acknowledge reality, to admit that the current model is broken. That means real reform, not temporary fixes. That reform starts with productivity, making it easier for businesses to innovate, produce, and compete. It means cutting red tape that suffocates investment and focusing on sectors that create value, not just debt. It means supporting small and medium enterprises instead of relying on endless government spending to stimulate growth. It also requires honesty from leadership, transparency about problems, and a clear path to solve them. Because pretending that everything is fine is what got Canada here in the first place. A healthy economy starts with trust, and trust starts with truth. And for citizens, the solution isn't despair, but awareness. It's understanding how we got here so we can demand better. Change doesn't begin with policy papers, it begins with pressure from voters, from businesses, from anyone who refuses to accept decline as normal. If there's one message to take away, it's this: it's not too late. The cracks are deep, but they're not permanent. The system can still be rebuilt, fairer and more productive, more resilient. So the question isn't whether Canada can recover, it's whether we'll choose to, before the slow fade becomes permanent. Because history shows that great nations don't fall when they run out of wealth, they fall when they run out of will.